So we've discussed the factors, individual levels, social factors, and situational factors that affect consumer buying behavior. Let's talk then about that decision-making process. Remember that the model that I proposed was one that suggested that all of those factors that we just discussed impact decision-making and eventually consuming behavior. So this is the general model of purchase decision of the purchase decision process, starting with problem recognition, information search, alternative evaluation, purchase decision, and then post-purchase behavior. Recall that marketers try to highlight the consumer problems and create a want and need. As persons search for information, the marketer's job is to provide information in the right place at the right time so that their alternative is considered, put in the consideration set. Then they also provide information to help consumers evaluate those alternatives and hopefully encourage them to choose their product. So marketers look at this particular process and try to influence it as consumers go through that process. Now, we talked about high involvement view of decision making. Your book talked about high involvement view, and this high involvement view of decision making is that consumers are information processors, are information seekers, rationally evaluate brands, seek maximum satisfaction, and lifestyles, personality, demographics are closely tied to consumer behavior because they help create the consumer's identity. The argument is that there are certain times when an individual is a highly involved decision maker. This might be buying, a new laptop computer. The alternative view is the low involvement view of decision making. This is when consumers learn information at random. Our consumers are information gatherers but not information seekers. Consumers buy first and then evaluate their decision. Consumers are more satisfiers rather than trying to optimize their purchase. Lifestyle personality DEMs are not closely tied to consumer behavior because they do not create the consumer's identity. Low involvement decision making might be something like stopping to get a Starbucks coffee on your way to school. The adaptive consumer view of decision making is that consumers learn information as they experience life. They try to make sense of the information by making generalizations. Consumers try to be consistent whenever risk is high, and consumers try to do the best they can given the uncertain environment in which they live. Experience and situational factors are the most critical influences of consumer behavior. So this view of consumers is that consumers as decision makers are basically adaptive. That is, they learn and try to make decisions based on their experiences rather than their involvement levels. Your book talks about three types of consumer decisions that might be made. Those include extended problem solving, limited problem solving, and routine problem solving. An example of extended problem solving might be to buy a new computer. A limited problem solving might be to go out and buy a new shirt or a new blouse for a particular gathering. A routine problem solving, of course, would be something like, once again, buying a Starbucks on your way to school. This, of course, then results in the argument of extended problem solving being high involvement and routine problem solving being low involvement. Understand that the involvement is not in a product, though. Involvement rests in the individual consumer, and I think sometimes the book gets this confused. It talks about high involvement products. There aren't any high involvement products. There are only high involvement consumers. The consumers where the involvement lies. And if buying a brand of golf ball is very, very important to me, then for that particular instance, I'm highly involved in that decision making. On the other hand, perhaps you're buying golf balls for someone as a gift. You might not be highly involved in that decision process. You simply go to the store, pick one of the most expensive brands, and just buy it. The role involvement by behavior. All right, so low involvement, we argue many times is focused on common products, and those sorts of things. And the argument is that the marketer needs to maintain product quality level, avoid stockers, reduce cognitive dissonance with ads. For high involvement consumers, we need to provide product information, use comparative ads, and use personal selling. Not sure that this is exactly right, but this is certainly something that the book argues is the right way to look at this. Some common selection criteria for using smartphones. So here the book used an example of the kinds of things that a person might consider when buying a cell phone. The price, the phone display, the audio quality, the text messaging, the wave capability, the camera quality, and maybe the battery life. And of course, that might make sense to you. And you'll notice then that we have the evaluations based on stars, 3 stars being superior and 1 star being average. So a person might be looking at these 5 phones as alternatives to purchase, probably not an iPhone 6 anymore, but then decide which of these alternatives is best based on evaluating the phone across these product attributes. All right, this is a fairly typical approach. This is called a MAU model, or a multi-attribute utility model approach of looking at products. The idea is that if you think of something like cell phones are in fact a bundle of attributes. You don't buy a cell phone because it's a cell phone, you buy it because of all of the attributes we just talked about. I have an example here. I have an example of selecting a university, and I have 3 universities under consideration: Reno State, UNLV, and the University of Elko. And the way that this multi-attribute utility model works is that we need to do 2 things. One is we need to evaluate the importance of each of the attributes. So the quality of education would be on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is very important and 1 is relatively unimportant. And so you would see that, for instance, quality of education is the most important. Cost is the second most important, but nowhere near as important as the quality of education. Placement and atmosphere are less important than cost, and the least important alternative for this particular individual is class sizes. Then an individual evaluates the alternatives on those attributes. So in this case, a quality of education, they rate UNLV as a 5, that is excellent. Reno State as 4, an above average, and the University of Elko as an average. And so we fill in this matrix based on the importance and then the evaluation of the alternatives. Now, the way the multi-attribute utility model works is that you multiply the importance score times the evaluation, and then you add those values up to get a score. And of course, so let's just use Reno State as an example. Quality of education, 5 times 4 is 20, plus 3 times 3 is the importance for cost, times the evaluation of cost for Reno is a 9. Placement is a 2 for importance, and it's evaluated as a 4, so that would be 8. The next one, atmosphere, would be a 6, and class size would be a 2, and then we add those up, we get 45. And the way that the multi-attribute utility model works is that it evaluates the alternatives based on the importance of the criteria and the evaluation of the alternatives on those criteria. In this case, the individual would prefer Reno State as would be their first choice, UNLV their second choice, and University of Elko their third choice. Now, one of the questions that comes up for a marketer when they see this sort of data is, well, if UNLV wants to be the first choice instead of the second choice, what do they need to do? Well, if you look at this matrix, one of the things that they could do is look at placement. The placement is the one category where they are worse than the other 2 schools. And they have 2 choices for placement to try to improve their overall evaluation. One is they could try to convince students that the placement activities at UNLV are much better than they currently believe. Here in the College of Business, of course, we have our own Career Placement Center that does a great job of helping our students with careers. The second alternative would be to place less importance on the placement, So placement isn't very important now, but if we remove the importance from 2 to a 1, then UNLV would be the top rated school. So the way that marketers look at this sort of information is to use it to come up with a marketing strategy to make sure that their alternative is selected first. Once again, this is called the multi-attribute utility model, or MAU model. Now here's an example where you can try it yourself. You simply put down your importance score and then evaluate the restaurants on the importance of each of those attributes, and then you simply add them up, and the restaurant that you prefer will be the one that has the highest score. We talk about post-purchase behaviors, and while your book doesn't say very much about this, this is very critical. So those three post-purchase behaviors that I think are very important and need to be discussed at least to some degree is the post-purchase evaluation of the product. You have a product, you buy it, and then you experience that product. One of three things can happen. Either you can be satisfied with the product, that is, it performs and the way that you anticipated that it would, that is, it meets your expectations. It could be that the product is better than you anticipated and does more than meet your expectations, exceeds your expectations. And the third alternative, of course, is that you could be dissatisfied, that is, the product falls short of your expectations. And then based on that information, you would either purchase the product again or provide positive or negative word of mouth. If you're very satisfied, you would obviously be most likely to produce positive word of mouth. If you're dissatisfied, you're likely to produce negative word of mouth. Data shows that on the average, people who are dissatisfied will make a larger effort and complain to more people than they will make positive statements if they are very satisfied. The last part of the post-purchase behavior is one that you probably have all experienced but didn't know what to call it. It's called post-purchase cognitive dissonance. This is the psychological tension or anxiety that is felt after making a purchase. It's the feeling that you might have made the wrong choice, or another alternative, or no choice at all might have been a better course of action. This is also sometimes referred to as buyer's remorse. This is that bad feeling you get in the pit of your stomach after you make a purchase. I recently experienced this. I bought a new automobile. It's a Chevrolet Colorado pickup truck. I'm not very satisfied with the dealership, and I do have some post-purchase cognitive dissonance associated with the product. All right, and then finally we talk about consuming behaviors. And so let's just, as a review, talk about what are buyer behaviors. So buyer behaviors include purchasing behaviors, post-purchase evaluation behaviors, consumption behaviors, that is how you actually consume the product, and disposal behaviors, that is how do you dispose of the product. You know, we all try to be positive recyclers, but how many of us recycle our clothes by sending them to Goodwill or do those sorts of things? And so these are the four actions that are basically referred to as buyer behaviors.